In a decision that is already being described as one of the most important legal moments in modern American history. The Supreme Court of the United States has delivered a stunning unanimous 9-0 ruling that instantly changes how federal law is applied across all 50 states. At a time when Americans are deeply divided politically and socially, the fact that every justice agreed on the outcome has captured national attention and sparked intense debate among legal experts, lawmakers, and everyday citizens alike. The ruling establishes a nation-wide legal standard, meaning Americans will now face the same rule regardless of whether they live in California, Texas, New York, or any other state, ending years of conflicting interpretations that had created confusion across lower courts. For many observers, the biggest headline is not just the decision itself, but the rare unity shown by the court, something that has become increasingly uncommon in recent decades. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority, emphasized that the Constitution must be applied consistently and that fundamental legal principles cannot shift depending on geography, political climate, or regional policy differences. According to the opinion, the court's responsibility is to ensure equal protection and uniform interpretation of federal law, a principle the justices agreed required immediate nationwide clarity. The case reached the Supreme Court after years of legal battles in multiple federal circuits, where judges issued conflicting rulings that left citizens unsure about their rights and obligations. Some states enforced one interpretation, while others followed a completely different approach, creating a patchwork legal system that critics argued undermined fairness. Businesses operating across state lines struggled to comply with different regulations. Individuals faced unequal treatment depending on location, and government agencies found enforcement increasingly complicated. By stepping in with a unanimous ruling, the Supreme Court effectively resolved these contradictions overnight. Legal analysts say the decision sends a powerful message that constitutional questions affecting the entire nation must have clear and consistent answers, especially when fundamental rights or nationwide policies are involved. Supporters of the ruling have praised it as a victory for equality and legal stability. They argue that Americans should not lose or gain protection simply by crossing state borders, and that a single national standard strengthens trust in the justice system. Civil rights advocates who backed the decision say it reinforces the idea that federal law exists to guarantee fairness for all citizens, not just residents of certain states. Many constitutional scholars also point out that unanimous rulings carry extra weight because they signal strong legal consensus rather than ideological compromise. When justices appointed by presidents from different political parties agree completely, it often indicates that the legal reasoning is particularly solid and difficult to challenge. However, not everyone is celebrating. Critics warn that nationwide rulings can reduce the authority of individual states to experiment with policies tailored to local needs. Some state officials argue that federalism, the balance of power between national and state governments, allows states to serve as testing grounds for different approaches, and they fear this decision could limit that flexibility. Political leaders have already begun debating whether Congress should pass legislation to clarify or adjust aspects of the ruling, suggesting the legal and political conversation surrounding the decision is far from over. Advocacy groups opposing the outcome are exploring future legal strategies, focusing on how the rule will be implemented rather than the ruling itself. Since overturning a unanimous Supreme Court decision is extremely difficult across the country, government agencies are now racing to interpret the decision and update policies to comply with the new legal standard. State courts must align their rulings with the Supreme Court's interpretation, while federal agencies may issue new guidance explaining how enforcement will change moving forward. Employers, educational institutions, and public organizations are reviewing internal policies to ensure they meet the updated requirements. Experts predict a transitional period, during which confusion may still exist as institutions adjust. But ultimately, the ruling is expected to reduce long-term legal disputes by eliminating conflicting standards. Economically, the decision could also have wide-ranging effects. Businesses often spend millions navigating different state regulations, and a unified rule may simplify compliance and reduce litigation costs. Investors and corporate leaders are closely monitoring the situation, viewing legal certainty as a factor that can influence economic planning and long-term growth. At the same time, advocacy organizations on both sides are preparing public awareness campaigns to explain how the ruling affects citizens directly. Since many Americans may not immediately realize how the decision influences their daily lives, politically, reactions have followed familiar lines, with some leaders calling the ruling a triumph of constitutional order, while others describe it as an expansion of federal authority. Social media has exploded with debate, as commentators attempt to interpret what the unanimous decision means for the future of the Supreme Court itself. Some analysts believe the ruling could restore public confidence in the judiciary by demonstrating that justices can still reach agreement on major national issues despite ideological differences. Others argue that future cases may test whether this unity was an exception rather than a trend. Legal historians note that unanimous Supreme Court rulings often become defining precedents that shape American law for generations. Because all 9 justices agreed, lower courts are less likely to challenge or reinterpret the decision, giving it unusually strong authority. The ruling may influence upcoming cases dealing with similar constitutional questions, effectively guiding how judges interpret federal power and individual rights moving forward. For law students and scholars, the decision is already being studied as an example of institutional consensus during a politically polarized era. For everyday Americans, the practical impact will gradually become clearer in the coming months. Changes may appear in workplace rules, administrative procedures, public services, or legal protections depending on how institutions apply the new standard. Experts encourage citizens to stay informed, as additional guidance from federal and state authorities is expected soon. While legal language can often feel distant from daily life, Supreme Court decisions frequently shape the systems people interact with every day, from employment policies to education regulations and beyond. Ultimately, this unanimous 9-0 decision represents more than just another court ruling. It marks a moment when the nation's highest court spoke with one voice on an issue affecting the entire country. Whether viewed as a historic step toward national consistency or a controversial expansion of federal influence, the ruling ensures that Americans in every state are now governed by the same legal interpretation. As implementation begins and reactions continue to unfold, the full consequences of this landmark decision will emerge over time, potentially redefining how federal authority and state power coexist in the modern United States. One thing is certain: moments like this do not happen often, and when they do, they leave a lasting imprint on the legal and political history of America.